Giga Chikadze? More like Giga, stop leading with your face because you keep getting countered over and over again with elbows. Hello and welcome to TENGRIDOME, episode 33, I guess. I think. I've lost count because last week's episode was the preview for Fight Night, Kattar vs Chikadze with Struum, and we both couldn't decide on whether or not that one would be an MMA podcast episode or a TENGRIDOME episode. So I've just set out on mashing the two together and sort of like rambling for an hour. But yeah, we've been feeling fairly low energy for the past couple months at this point. And for Struum, this fight was the, I guess, a sort of a checkpoint after which he will decide on whether or not he will continue caring about MMA going forward. And I suppose since the fight turned out to be pretty awesome, I guess he cares now. And for me, I wasn't so far gone into the depths of cynicism, but I was feeling quite low energy. I have to admit, I wouldn't lie. I was feeling a bit under the weather, and currently I'm kind of like... And for the past couple of weeks, honestly, lots of shit has been happening in real life, and I think I mentioned that on the end of the year TENGRIDOME that I've recorded right on New Year's Eve, and I've been having some sleep related issues for the past couple of weeks, so I've been feeling kind of messed up. But I've had I've had a short deadlift session, so I'm feeling kind of energized. So I figured I might as well just hop into it. But yeah, Kattar vs Chikadze, awesome fight. Bit of a beating, really. Not really like a fight in the sense that it was like a back and forth banger, but it was certainly action packed. Chikadze left the octagon looking way worse for wear than Kattar did, and honestly, it was more of a career comeback, I suppose, performance for Kattar, in the sense that everyone was sort of worried about Kattar's prospects going forward after that Max Holloway beating that he took. And for good reason, because beatings like this, where a fighter takes like 700 punches to the head without really giving anything back for 5 rounds straight, they tend to alter career trajectories quite a bit for various reasons. It can be a confidence issue, it can be a straight up physical issue because you're getting beaten up, obviously you're getting wailed on. And Kattar, it seems that Kattar took the smart approach, which is refreshing and fairly rare in MMA. I mean, another example would be Brian Ortega after the Max Holloway beating, and I suppose Brian Ortega after the Volkanovski beating. Just can't catch a break, that Brian Ortega. But Calvin Kattar took a year off. I didn't really take all that much to recover, it seems, and went back to square one, went back to the drawing board, and came back with some lessons. And he showcased I would say a rather rare willingness to learn and adjust between fights, and he didn't necessarily took the perfect lessons from that fight, and he would have to be a very, very smart man indeed to be able to manage that. But whatever adjustments that he did take prior to this fight, and whatever adjustments that he did showcase in this fight, they were pretty much spot on. They were not ideal, but they worked, and they were good. And that's all you could ask for, really, from a competitor like him. But to zoom out a little and remind, let's just rewind a little bit, and look at the things that we decided to emphasize prior to this fight, the things that we mentioned in the preview. Kattar historically has struggled with prolific kickers, but he has struggled in particular with kickers who are able to mix punches and kicks together in a very fluent way. So it's not like any kicker will do. It's not like if you just kick, then you've got Kattar's number. It doesn't work like that. And in particular, I would say that a more pressing concern for Kattar was his lack of directionality in fights. And I'm going to talk about this quite a bit throughout this breakdown. What do I mean by that? Kattar is his fights tend to be sort of aimless, in the sense that he doesn't pick a direction in which he wants the fight to go. And I'm not just talking about going backwards or forwards or just like skipping sideways. No, it's not literal in that respect. It's not that literal. What I'm talking about is that sometimes Kattar would just sort of hang around and try to figure out at which range he wants to engage, and he wants that very specific range. It's not like he's comfortable in all ranges, although he should be. It's just that mentally he becomes uncomfortable where he can't where he can't pelt people with his jab, where he can't just... and he likes having that full extension on that jab. He likes knowing that he has a full extension on a jab, and then he can unleash like a really good right straight or anything else. So this results in a situation where whenever he starts leading, and he's very uncomfortable about leading, and this will play a role later in the fight, he becomes sloppier. He just kind of looks sloppy. Because part of it is because he starts smothering his own punches, and part of it is just that his footwork is just not very nuanced, not very tight on the lead. He's much more... He looks much prettier as a back foot counterpuncher, but the problem is that as a back foot counterpuncher, generally what you need to do is take a very small step backwards and then immediately unleash a counter. Kattar has a tendency of conceding space for no reason, and that's what's fucked him against Max Holloway in their fight. If you go back and watch that fight, it's Holloway like unleashing a blitz, and it could be a very sloppy blitz at times. It wasn't like a completely flawless performance, and in those spots, you could see moments where like there was this split second where Kattar could have countered Max Holloway and clattered him quite badly, but instead what Kattar did was just continue backpedaling until his back hit the fence. And you saw Yair Rodriguez do a good job of standing his ground, firing back with check hooks and straights, and as a result, Max left that fight, even though Max dominated, he was banged up quite a bit. It wasn't like completely one-sided, even though it was dominant. There's like degrees of that in fighting. So, so now you have this dilemma where just hanging around, floating in neutral space is not a good idea against a dedicated kicker like Chikadze, who is, even though he's fairly rudimentary, it's not like he's he plays the usual southpaw double attack game with kicks, with the body kick and the high kick, except he doesn't really have the tightest form on those weapons, and he doesn't have the tightest form with punches. He doesn't tie punches and kicks together in a very like intelligent and smart way. And like it doesn't look seamless. Even like at the most basic mechanical level, it's not seamless. His punches look different from his kicks, and his kicks look different from his punches, and his high kick looks different from his middle kick, and etc. etc. Sriram pointed this out on the preview, and we saw that play out in the fight itself. If you want to look at a pretty basic but nonetheless very effective example of how a southpaw double attacker, a southpaw kicker should look, I would say, I mean, it's a very basic example. It's a very, it's a very evocative example, which is Mirko Krokop. Just go back and watch his fights, both in K1 and in Pride. And you would see, and look in particular at his form and at how he positions himself in the cage, in the ring rather, in those fights, at his prime. In the UFC, he kind of like gotten sloppy, but in his prime, in Pride and in K1, it was pretty much picture perfect. He would like float around needlessly, like around his opponent, and there would be no fat on his kicks and punches. They would be snappy, they would be explosive, and they would just BAM! Just come out of nowhere and clatter his opponent. With Giga, there's always this sort of like a sort of a load up, and his kicks and punches are always kind of like they're very powerful, they're very fast and very strong, and they're very like damaging, but it's not like they're not very tight. They're kind of like formless. I mean, it could be a deliberate choice, but in that it's kind of like the difference between hitting someone with a baseball bat and hitting someone with like a rubber band, you know, like one of those strength cables, like the rubber bands that you work out with, or for example, like. But I suppose a better comparison would be like your dad's belt. You know what I mean? The latter sure hurts a lot, but it's not as internally and just solidly damaging as a baseball bat, you know? So back to Kattar. So both of them don't have the tightest ring craft. Kattar kind of doesn't know where he wants the fight to stay, where he wants the fight to go. Usually, that was his tendency for quite a while now, up until this fight. Giga Chikadze doesn't necessarily corral his opponents into back foot exchanges where he just takes a stand and then unleashes his offense on the counter. If you go like with good fighters of that mold, they kind of like take a step backwards, and once you cross a distance threshold, it acts as a trigger where they kind of sort of like feel you come closer. You cross a certain line, a certain like imaginary line in the sand between you and them, and then once you cross that, once they feel like you're in range, they just spam attacks, and it sounds very basic and sounds very primitive, but it works really well, especially if you're physical and powerful and explosive, and good southpaws tend to be. Giga, however, is kind of like content, like he's similar to Kattar in the sense that he's content with floating around on the outside, not exactly having like strong triggers, and so as a result, Kattar kind of like finally decided on picking a direction where he just decided to barge into range and swarm Giga Chikadze, and he's had lots of success doing that because Giga Chikadze's feet started just falling apart on the back foot. So like it's this interesting situation where both guys have clear issues with their footwork and ring craft, but one of them kind of understood it, realized his limitations, and realized the limitation of his opponent and decided to exploit that, even though it would look ugly and sloppy and it may get him hurt, but it was the right decision. It was absolutely the right decision. He worked around his limitations, understood his limitations, and picked a good solution. It wasn't a perfect solution, it was a good solution. One of the solutions that I've suggested in the preview is that to spare himself the damage and to spare the danger of floating around in neutral space getting kicked up by an opportunistic Giga Chikadze, what Kattar could do is to stay just outside of that range on those kicks, just a touch farther than the reach of the foot, to frustrate Giga and sort of like pot shot and use in and out movement. And I'm certain that with Kattar's arsenal, with his boxing proficiency, it could have worked. And especially if he decided to use like linear side kicks to the knee, front kicks to the body, linear kicks to the body, and that kind of stuff. It's just that obviously Calvin Kattar is not that type of fighter. He doesn't use those tools. It's not his. It's not exactly. It's not like it's not in his toolbox. It's just that he chooses not to use it. It's not his go-to technique to use, and that's perfectly fine. It was more of a sort of a hypothetical that I threw out there, in the sense that if I were to game plan for Giga Chikadze and work with Calvin Kattar, it would be one of the options that are on the table. It could have obviously failed and backfired. So in this scenario, going forward and dumping lots of offense on Giga Chikadze and banking on your durability and ability to maintain a frantic pace, a really crazy pace, almost Max Holloway-esque, was the right decision. I always talk about how there's this dichotomy in decision making when you're fighting. You either decide to leverage your attributes and kind of sort of rely upon them to carry you through the fight and grind your opponent out through pace, be it in wrestling or in striking or volume offense, going forward, tanking shots, or you could just pick specific tactical adjustments and circumnavigate your opponent, and both are valid. Both are entirely valid, and whenever a fighter showcases either of those, I'm impressed. So the problem that Kattar had, for example, go back and watch the Kattar versus Zabit fight. Zabit draws Kattar out towards himself, makes him pressure, and Kattar just looks kind of sort of lost pressuring. His punches are smothered, his offense is smothered, he's getting kicked up and countered. It's not like he's getting his ass kicked or accumulating tons of damage. It's just that he's not exactly able to fire off with solid offense, and Zabit is racking up points. But whenever he kind of decides to stand his ground in neutral space and kind of draws Zabit out towards him, his counters are crisp and clean, and the range is there. It's just that he likes having that range. He enjoys having extension on the jab. He enjoys knowing that he will have full extension on his punches. And he lost the decision, and after that, I think immediately after that was the Stevens fight, and after this fight, he kind of took a lesson in that, when I'm leading, I'm smothering my own punches, and when I'm smothering my own punches, my fists kind of my arms start bending at the elbows. What's this? I can use elbows, and then he knocks Jeremy Stevens out with an elbow, going forward. It's not like he doesn't swarm Jeremy Stevens or anything. It's just that he stands in neutral space, throws a jab, and then once Jeremy Stevens uses the jab as a trigger to start firing back, Kattar steps in with an elbow and decks and cuts Jeremy Stevens across the forehead, and it's a neat little mid-fight adaptation. It shows that Kattar is still savvy. He's very gifted at these offensive. He's very gifted at coming up with these offensive looks, and that's what I really appreciate about him as a fighter. And so we come to the fight itself. I'm gonna point out why some of Giga's offensive options stopped working throughout the breakdown. So bear with me. Okay, so the fight starts. Kattar kind of doesn't necessarily start super fast. He doesn't barge into range out of the gate and starts pouring on offense. It doesn't. He takes a second, to sort of get a feel for Giga's timing and that kind of stuff. Giga connects with a couple kicks, some of them on the guard. Connects with a couple punches on the guard. Connects with a couple jabs, and then Giga throws a very, very committed kick without really thinking about recovery. What do I mean by that? He throws a really committed kick, and he doesn't he doesn't think about stopping the kick or where he will stop the kick and like returning into his stance, or doesn't think about spinning through. He just throws the kick misses, and he just falls flat on his ass. Kattar, because he's not an idiot, obviously exploits that, chases Giga to the fence, takes the back, takes him down, spends the rest of the fight in top mount. Or in half guard, whatever. Basically, he spends the rest of the round on top. Conceivably, you could score that round for Giga because he was the one landing offense, and Kattar just merely held him down. But as a result, Giga is frustrated. Obviously, he's didn't get the opportunity to score for the rest of the round from that moment onwards, and he comes, starts the round 2 very quickly, very fast. Starts pouring on offense, starts kicking, starts punching. But because he's anxious, his general problem with his mechanics and technique is exacerbated, because once again his punches become even more slappy. He starts doing these ugly blitzes, and that's why I talked about Calvin Kattar floating around on the outside. The purpose of that particular game plan could have been to frustrate Giga and draw out these ugly blitzes that he does. And the problem is that Giga starts leading with his face. It doesn't it's okay to shift, it's okay to blitz, provided you don't lead with your face and your punches don't come like. His punches are really weird whenever he does a blitz. It's not like he's doing a shift with his hips. First he throws a punch, and then his hips follow the course of the punch. It looks very strange, and he doesn't generate a lot of power that way. And so whenever Giga connected with punches going forward, they weren't really stinging, powerful shots, even though he's clearly able. He clearly should be able to really deck people with really powerful punches. He's a powerful man. He has power. He has that snap. But whenever he smothers his own offense like that, it just doesn't lead to much of anything, really. And so Kattar kind of sort of tanked a couple of those shots on the guard, kind of blocked, slipped, the rest of it. And it all came on the same rhythm. It didn't Giga didn't use a jab to step in with the jab and then delay a right hand or anything. He doesn't do that stuff. Kattar does. And that played a really, really major role in some of these exchanges, because Kattar got the timing on those punches, started slipping, rolling with a lot of them. As a result, he was able to evade a lot of the offense, and what offense did connect was the damage on it was curtailed because of Giga's mechanics. And then once Kattar got the bead on Giga Chikadze, he just started coming forward and throwing punches. He started throwing punches, and those punches were once again a bit smothered. They weren't very powerful, and he's kind of at first he was loading up on them quite a bit, and as a result, not all of them connected very well. But whenever they did connect, they obviously hurt Giga Chikadze very badly. And I think in the second round, that's when one of the cuts appeared on his face. It wasn't from an elbow, it was from a punch, I think. It was, and funnily enough, kind of in a Jeremy Stevens parallel, once Giga was cut up, Calvin Kattar started throwing elbows. It's kind of like when Jeremy Stevens hits a body late in the fight and realizes that he can hit the body. And again, Kattar did that as well in this fight. Somewhere around the 4th and 5th rounds, he started hitting the body. It's very funny. So basically, Calvin Kattar started swarming Giga Chikadze, and that's what he did. He didn't pressure Giga Chikadze. It's a common mistake that even the UFC commentators constantly make. They call swarming pressure, and what's the difference? The difference is that pressure is the use of your presence to maintain initiative and eat away at the space that's available to your opponent. So they only have You pressure them to the cage or to the ropes, and now they have only two avenues of escape. They become more predictable. So you maintain initiative over their ability to navigate the space in which they operate, and then you can punish them. And you cut the ring or cut the cage by taking steps across yourself, moving sideways to stay on top of your opponent. It's not necessarily just throwing lots and lots of shit at them. You can do that while pressuring. It's just that you have to kind of, utilize your ringcraft and control the space with your footwork to properly pressure. And what Kattar did was to just chase after Giga Chikadze, and he did not let up. He basically, Giga Chikadze would run away from him along the fence, kind of skipping away. And instead of cutting him off, Kattar would just chase after him. But since Giga Chikadze is kind of foot slow, and Kattar was using shifting movement, kind of doing a bit of a Dustin Poirier impression, he was able to chase after him, and because of his, not only because of that, but because of his ranginess as well, and he was able to catch Giga Chikadze moving backwards. Then Giga Chikadze figured, oh fuck, I'm getting messed up while I'm backpedaling. I have to do something. And he started trying to barge back into range, and that's when Kattar and those were very telegraphed entries, and because of that, Kattar was able to time those entries, those desperate entries. He would actually draw them out while chasing after Giga Chikadze. It was awesome. He would chase after Giga Chikadze, throw a jab, 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 then shift into a right hand and continue with a jab, jab, jab. Then Giga Chikadze would barge into range, and then he would spin through and hit him with a spinning elbow right on the jaw. It was kind of it's almost acted like a check hook from open, it's hard to explain, but he would deck him across the jaw with it. It was almost like getting decked with a hook, with a check hook coming in, except it's a spinning attack from within range, from the inside. It's sick. It's just really cool. It just looks cool, and it's very effective. And you could see that Giga Chikadze was hurt quite a bit by it. It's just that Giga Chikadze also has a fairly decent chin, so you didn't go out. But a lesser fighter would have been just floored by this type of attack. And then, somewhere in the third round, Kattar kind of started becoming better and better at actually leading. Where at first he would just kind of look really awkward and slow doing that. He would kind of take a step back and figure out, oh, okay, I need to reset. I need to think about what I'm going to do. And it was kind of a funny dichotomy between him looking measured at first, and then he was just sprinting forward like a madman. But I think I know why that happened. It's just that he's not yet entirely comfortable with leading that way, moving and pursuing opponents on the front foot, so kind of needed a moment to reassess himself. And he would stance switch while doing that. And normally I would not advocate for stance switches, constant stance switches. It's much better to... I know why he did it. He did not want to get kicked up, and he wanted to provide different looks so Giga doesn't know with which leg to kick, whether he needs to leg kick or he needs to kick to the body. But normally what I would recommend is get really good at kicking, at defending kicks, rather. Really good at checking. And so if you stand open stance, you cross check, you bring your front knee in front of you, and kind of the rear knee. Honestly, both kind of work. You bring one of your knees, bring them up and in a checking motion, in order to touch your elbow with the knee, with the point of your elbow with the knee, and it forms you. It's kind of as it is with the regular check against the leg kick, you do that against the body kick from open stance. It's called a cross check. And against leg kick, obviously, you just check the kicks. But since Kattar is not exactly a very prolific kick checker, I guess it made sense for him to continue giving Giga different looks to sort of throw him off. It's just that against a savvier kicker, it's not exactly going to work. And then, so basically what this resulted in is that Calvin Kattar was able to... well, actually, now that I think about it, like, shifting stances just like in front of Giga Chikadze may not have been... while it may seem like not the textbook thing to do, in the context of that fight, it's okay, because Giga wasn't, like, punishing it in any way. And it allowed Calvin Kattar to set up shifting offense. So I guess it's fine. And Giga's defensive responses weren't exactly varied. He would kind of like duck, sort of like slip to the side, and he would usually slip to only one side and slip with the same timing, constantly react to Kattar's throwaway strikes the same way, and Kattar would start timing them. You could see him trying to figure out the timing on the uppercut, and then he was able to do that. And later in the fight, when he figured that, when Giga actually like started like being able through the sheer fact that he got clattered with so many punches, he was able to slip some of them. Kattar just started hitting the body. Even though, I mean, obviously, the ideal way would be to start hitting the body from the get-go, because the body will always be there, unlike the head. But whatever. And where was I? Yeah, shifting offense. Okay, so basically, like, Kattar picked a direction, started shifting, started fucking Giga up. Hit upon the elbow thing and started fucking Giga up even worse. The one thing I wanted to mention is that the commentary in this fight, normally, like, the commentary is generally like it seems like the general UFC mandate is to downplay the violence that is unfolding on the screen. It's to make the casual viewer feel like they're not watching a beating, but they're watching a fight. And so every time like someone is not doing well, it's kind of like they give like this canned response where they say, "Oh, so-and-so isn't doing well, but you never know, like one punch can change it all, etc., etc., etc." And Bisping is the biggest offender in that respect. And in this fight, every time where Bisping would like point out all the ways in which Giga Chikadze is being like demolished, he would say, but make no mistake, I'm a huge Giga fan. Giga can still got it. He can still come back. It just made for a very, very bizarre experience watching this fight with commentary on. And Dominic Cruz and Bisping were talking about how Giga Chikadze could change forward momentum by shooting and by attempting a takedown. And like, Giga Chikadze wouldn't do that. He can't do that. You can't ask a fighter to just come out with come up with a look that he's never shown before. Like a much more sensible comment would be to, oh, look, Giga Chikadze is trying to punish Calvin Kattar's jab, but he just hasn't got the timing on it because he's constantly backpedaling. Because that's what was happening. I mean, whatever. The commentary booths. It's just atrocious across all sports. Actually, speaking about that, now that I mention it, there's a discussion panel in the works about all the issues that we see with commentary in MMA at the fight site. So stay tuned for that. Anyway, back to the fight. The funny thing is, whenever Giga started getting a sort of like started figuring out Kattar's timing, Kattar would mess it up. He would be the one to actually initiate grappling situations and wrestling situations first. Because everyone forgets about this, and everyone except I think Paul from Southpaw. When we were previewing his fight against Max Holloway, Paul from Southpaw actually mentioned this like as a possibility against Max Holloway. Hasn't been able to utilize this against Max Holloway, but was able to showcase this in this particular fight. It's that Calvin Kattar has decent wrestling credentials. And I presume he has wrestled some guys on the regionals because he has quite an assortment of decision wins, and I presume that's where they came from. Correct me if I'm wrong. Correct me if I'm wrong in the comments or in the replies on the Twitter thread in which I will post this podcast. One thing that I've noticed Kattar doing, and one thing that I would like him to do more often, and that's why I said it's not his preferred tool in the toolbox, but one that would benefit him quite a bit, was the linear kicks to the gut. And the way Kattar shifted, honestly, it makes me think that you could... it's a bit 5 years too late, but honestly, if... it's kind of like the tragedy of Calvin Kattar in general. Like, the man is obviously extremely talented. An extremely talented guy. Very, very technically savvy. Obviously, the ringcraft and footwork are his weaknesses, and he's not like the most defensively sound fighter out there, but he's decent. He's one of the better ones. And beyond that, extremely offensively potent, extremely offensively talented. And if you were to teach him how to combine kicking offense with his shifting, he would become just that much more potent. If you were only to teach him how to kick to the gut in open stance and how to leg kick in closed stance, off the punches, and mix the two together, he'd be so dangerous. He'd be a murderer. And it would be even more awesome to watch. But what are you gonna do? Anyway, that's the fourth round for you, basically. And the final really cool look of the fourth round was the skip up, the skip feint into like a front tomahawk elbow. It's like when you do a skip up and then enter with a punch, except this time Kattar entered with an elbow. It was awesome. You just really, really neat little looks that you rarely see from fighters in MMA. You can't praise it enough. Like, he used a front kick earlier in that round, and then he just kind of shown trying to do that, and then just used that to get into range, get within range, and then unleash an elbow. It's extremely useful against kickers in particular, because whenever you're fighting against a kicker, whenever you find your jab counted with a leg kick, timed with a leg kick, or timed with an open stance kick, what you can do is just enter behind the raised knee, and the raised knee will kind of like act like a sort of like you're showing that you're kind of trying to you're showing that you're gonna push them away with a kick. Either that, or you're showing that if they kick, it's not gonna connect on anything except the check, and then you can start punching afterwards. It's very useful. Masvidal back in his journeyman days was very proficient at that, and he would kind of like combine it. Like, he would do a skip up, and then jab to the chest, and once the opponent is distracted by the jab to the chest, he would throw a right hand or something else. Just really neat look. Jabbing off hooking off that jab to the chest behind the skip up is also a neat look. You can steal it. I'm giving you carte blanche to steal it for your next sparring session, whenever that may be. Anyway, fifth and final round, basically more of the same. Kattar starts connecting with basically everything that he throws. Giga Chikadze is exhausted, unable to mount any offense, face a bloodied mask. Kattar starts unleashing combination elbows, and that's what kind of reminded me of the kickboxer, the Australian or like New Zealand kickboxer. I think he's Australian, yeah. Carnage Corbett. Nathan Carnage Corbett. I think Jack Slack mentioned him quite a while ago on one of his older podcasts where he talked about Nathan Corbett and sort of boxing with the elbows. where he would throw elbows the same way like you would throw a boxing combination. Like you would throw an uppercut elbow followed by a left kind of like sort of a left hook elbow. I hope you understand what I mean. And Kattar did that. It was awesome. It's so great. What a performance. Anyway, after a couple of minutes more of that, a couple of minutes more of the same, Giga is just unable to take it anymore. Gets knocked down, falls down at the very last second of the fight, and that's that. Almost got knocked out, but just like it was spared that fate by the fact that the fight was basically over by that point. So, kind of like, just kind of beautiful in a sense. Like, Kattar was able to like sort of paint a masterpiece almost. Like, after so many years of being criticized for having troubles with picking a direction in the fight and having troubles with kickers, being exposed, quote unquote, after the Max Holloway fight, comes back, beats a hyped prospect, a prospect that a contender rather, even a contender even. The UFC clearly wanted to fast track Giga Chikadze for that title shot. All the Giga Kick marketing and that kind of bullshit, and the things that Giga Chikadze was talking about, jumping in there and like fucking Volkanovski up, getting that belt, and ignoring Kattar, and looking past him. Kattar comes in, dominates Giga Chikadze, beats him from pillar to post for 5 rounds, and then knocks him down at the very last second of the very last round. Just you get this visual vista. Get this vista of Giga Chikadze falling down at the very last second of the fight, and Kattar barging in to finish him, and then the fight ends. Mercifully, the fight ends, and couldn't be done better. Couldn't write a better story if you tried. But anyway, the takeaways. I saw some people talking about that Kattar got worse and that he looked sloppier with his boxing. And I mean, the only appropriate response is the one my friend Simon Amorim came up with, is that Kattar said, "Fuck it, we ball," and did cool, nasty shit. And various nerds and losers just can't get it, can't understand it, can't wrap their brains around it. Just, we wanted Kattar to look more boring and safe. Instead of giving us this amazing, bloody, gritty fights that you can revisit over and over again in the future. I mean, as I've said this multiple times already, Kattar has always sucked at leading, picking directions in the fight, because his sense of distance, once again, let's just revisit all the primary takeaways from this fight. His sense of distance is predicated on being able to measure with the jab. His fights are always aimless, and were, at the very least, always aimless until he found the range and stuck with and could stick the jab and counter. Here, he decided to never stop going forward like a madman, and the fact that he looked mechanically sloppy is irrelevant when compared to the strategic importance of that decision. It was ugly and nasty, and it won him the fight. It was almost like an adaptation stolen from Max Holloway in a sense, because what he did kind of reminded me of what Max Holloway did to Calvin Kattar, in that Max Holloway obviously never stopped pressing forward and unleashed a hellacious barrage of elbows on Calvin Kattar, which is the point at which the fight should have been stopped, in my opinion, but it wasn't, so what are you going to do? So basically what happened is that Calvin Kattar survived the second Battle of Fallujah, and his takeaway was, "I'm fucking invincible." So he started pressing forward, tanking Giga's strikes and just fucking him up, but Upon revisiting this fight, I've noticed that Kattar actually received way less damage than it seemed live. And indeed, I was in the voice chat with our Discord patrons for that fight, and a lot of the Discord patrons still kept insisting that the fight is still close. And upon revisiting this fight, I'm sorry, no, it wasn't. But I mean, watching fights live is it's a skill you have to cultivate, and not a lot of people are really that great at figuring out what's in which direction the fight is going. I personally never had trouble with it, but it's a common enough thing that I shouldn't be too hard on people for it, for displaying this trait. Anyway, I think what I wish to emphasize with this fight in particular, with this performance in particular, is that Haxorized always talks about it, in that self-awareness is a borderline superpower in combat sport. The ability to look at yourself in the mirror without insecurity, without allowing insecurity to dictate your understanding of what happened, to dictate your perception of self. And it's in direct juxtaposition with the idea that fighters have to be delusional. And it's something Joe Rogan says on his podcast over and over again, and something that fans repeat constantly, uncritically, over and over again, whenever a fighter displays the sort of borderline delusion about their prospects and about their skill set and abilities. Giga Chikadze came out after this fight saying that 9 out of 10 times I win. What Giga Chikadze said, laying in the hospital, after Calvin Kattar graciously took a picture with him, showed him a sign of respect for a fight well fought. Giga Chikadze went to the hospital, all sorts of fucked up, both eyes blackened, with 2 black eyes, cut up to absolute pieces, says, if I fought with this guy 10 times, I would lose 1 time, and it was last night. I mean, you could say this sort of shit if you, bungled a slam attempt and knocked yourself out, or something dumb like that. Or if your, knee exploded and then you got knocked out by an opportunistic opponent. But when you got 50-45'd, maybe don't do that. Maybe don't say stupid shit. And it's I'm not talking about fighters themselves. Yeah, sure, fighters themselves may be delusional. Maybe it's better to perceive yourself as unbeatable and invincible, and to increase your confidence on the fight night. But the coach's staff should be really realistic at all times, and the coaching staff should provide frequent reality checks to their fighters. Otherwise, they just turn into yes men. Confidence is crucial, but mindless delusion ruins development. Elite competition, if you wish to hang in there with the elites, you have to constantly critically evaluate skill, yours or your opponent's. You have to critically evaluate your abilities and see if there's any habits or flaws in your skill set that your opponent may exploit. I mean, sure, it's the coach's job to do that, but I mean, neither the coaches nor the fighters in MMA really engage in that type of ruthless critical evaluation, clinical picking apart, clinical analysis of skill of both the opponent and the fighter themselves. And refusing to acknowledge that you have weaknesses or that your habits may be exploited by savvy opponents means you're easier to beat. And refusing to acknowledge that you got beat for precisely those reasons means the only thing you took away from the fight that you've lost is brain trauma. And coaches who carelessly encourage delusion without harsh, realistic criticism and frequent reality checks can easily cause their fighters' skill development to plateau and subsequently decline. Like, believe in yourself all you want, but it has to be backed up by real skill and smart use of talent. Otherwise, you're just a bag of hot air, of which there's a dime a dozen in every field ever invented by humans. And someone is bound to pop your balloon eventually. Like, obviously you have to believe in yourself, but there's a level of confidence that I see being encouraged in fighters across the board that would lead to those fighters never exploring the upper limits of their skill ceiling. Like, fighters just straight up get their asses beat while never, ever learning from their mistakes. And that's just one of the reasons why career turnarounds are so exceedingly rare in the sport. Neither camps nor coaches seem to ever try and address or work around limitations. Talented guys aimlessly float around in the cage and up and down the rankings. And sure, a lot of it is bizarre matchmaking, but it's not like it's only the UFC or other fight organizations who are at fault for this. My point is that a dangerous and unhelpful level of confidence is encouraged across all levels in combat sports, culturally, financially, and socially. Like, delusion is straight up dangerous, but people with no competition experience consider all forms of formidable confidence to be delusional. So in their mind, delusion equals a high level of confidence. And people really need to wise up to the fact that in the context of high-level competition, some bubbles absolutely need to be burst because people are getting hurt because of them. And like, even from a selfish standpoint, we straight up get worse product as consumers. So when more people wise up to the realities of elite competition, societal pressure for the sport to evolve rises. We need to start developing sets of best practices and incentivize good institutional precedents. And obviously, uncritically accepting dumbness won't help anyone. That's what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about fighters themselves being punished for, like, maintaining, like for believing in themselves. I'm not talking about it. The one counter argument I frequently see is that people like say, but fighters are dumb when they can't critically evaluate their own skill sets, and what if they start having doubts, etc., etc. Like, they're gonna have worse doubts after they get their shit kicked in for being in denial about having a giant hole in their game. I mean, most of them are tough people. They should be able to figure it out. And, like, sure, the coach should be the one to be all cynical and realistic about the fighter's prospects. But that includes slapping your fighter if they ever go, mentally I am undefeated. And honestly, it doesn't seem like there's an awful lot of them actually doing that. Like, honestly, I'm just really, really done with delusion being propped up as a required trait. Like, true confidence is found in reflection, and admittedly the road to achieve it is very hard-fought. Many only come close to it when they hit the end of the line, but nothing prevents you from striving to achieve it, aside from your own insecurity. And honestly, truly knowing what you can do is much more rewarding than just pretending you can. But first you gotta acknowledge your limitations, and you can start by admitting that you have those. Obviously, this depends. This heavily depends on the personality of the fighter in question. But Hacks pointed this out to me in a conversation once. Is that confidence exists on a spectrum between goals and processes, or steps to get there. Like, for most fighters, sitting a lot closer to the goal side of the spectrum when being delusional is the right move, but being deluded about your goal or capabilities is one thing, and warranted for many people and many personality types, but being deluded about your analytical process to get there is how fighters end up with CTE at 35. Like, this guy beat me and I've had 2 losses versus top 5 guys, but I can turn around. If I can turn it around, I will be champion. That's the type of thinking that is required if you ever want to do if you want to repeat the success of Charles Oliveira or Michael Bisping. But going, this guy is bad and 9 out of 10 times I win, I just underperformed, is usually the fastest track to just a career dead end. Like, believing that you can improve to an insane degree is necessary. Like believing that you can become a different person or a different fighter or become a better version of yourself is necessary. Like, even if it isn't true, but believing that you don't need to, now that's poisonous. Like, to quote Sriram, someone like Kattar saying that he wants the belt seems silly, but that's normal, and it's framed properly. It's framed as, I need to get a ton better. Like, there's a very hard road ahead of me. I need to improve. It will be super hard, but I will. And that sort of framing is beneficial. Framing matters. And Chikadze and O'Malley, on the other hand, they would stay useless if they could help it, because losses aren't their fault. It's just never my fault, this type of thinking. Anyway, where I'm going with this. What Kattar showed is an example, a really great example of good confidence. Like, Kattar got his ass kicked, and his response was to shut up and go back to training. Just to go back, put in hard work to improve, and he actually tried to address an old weakness, which is being uncomfortable with leading and conceding ground for no reason, that kind of stuff. And he looked wobbly and wonky and awkward in spots, and he should, because he's trying things that have historically made him uncomfortable. He's trying new things. And he took damage doing it, but the fact that he had the guts to go ahead and do it is incredibly encouraging. And I respect that way, way more than guys just refusing to acknowledge that they have any flaws. And going, mentally I am undefeated. Mentally I am 11-0. My win streak hasn't been broken. Yada yada yada. Don't respect that. And I think fans, in general, should stop respecting it. Like, as a rule. Because it's one of those issues that tie into the general institutional problems that like cultural problems that we have in MMA, like the idea of toughness and the idea of going out on your shield. The idea that, if the fighter still wants it, then he should fight, even though the fighter is clearly past it physically. That kind of stuff. Like, fight fans are really immature, as a rule. And there is a tendency to think of fighters as sacks of meat that are just invincible and that can take anything. Or that it's easier to think about fighters as like, the fighters are a breed apart. They do not possess the same needs and problems that us humans do, and they have completely different concerns. So it's fine for them to act like shitheads or act deluded or act silly. And it's okay for fighters to go for like meme career routes instead of improving in areas in which they should improve to continue if they have any hope of achieving elite status. Looking at you, Kevin Holland. I think this is just an attitude that I have a particular distaste towards. It's an attitude that I think encourages stagnation. It doesn't encourage improvement, and it goes against I don't know, this is going to sound wanky, but it goes against the spirit of martial arts, really. Not in the like honorable and respectful behavior sort of sense. It's in the sense that in order to be a better fighter, you have to ruthlessly evaluate yourself and constantly improve. You have to constantly train. That's what combat sports and fighting is about. You fight tough opponents who are also constantly tough on themselves and constantly train. And so constantly training to kick their ass better is the most respectful thing you can do. Really, in this context. So, like, I wouldn't have as much of a problem with Chikadze's statement if it was framed as, oh, okay, Keita was better that night, he kicked my ass, wasn't able to showcase my A game, but I will come back, I will improve, and if Keita wants a rematch, I will improve, and then I will beat the shit out of him. Now that would be normal. That's the kind of confidence that I can get behind, even if I do not necessarily realistically agree with what he's saying. But if he were to say that and pull it off, then my stock of Giga Chikadze would the stock Giga Chikadze's stock would raise in my eyes, like it would just skyrocket. It's like it's a difference in framing, you see. And people usually don't think about it all that much, and it leads to a lot of dumbness and misconceptions and misunderstandings in the discourse. What are you gonna do? Anyway, that's me off the soapbox. Just couldn't praise. Can't heap enough praise on Calvin Kattar for pulling this one off. Really, really awe-inspiring performance. Just excellent stuff. Here's to more interesting and exciting performances. Just not sure who haven't given much thought to possible matchups yet, but we shall see. We shall evaluate them as they come. Beyond that, we have UFC 270 coming up, and I have a decent amount of thoughts on Francis Ngannou versus Cyril Gane. But I think for now, this episode, I think I'd like to keep this episode as a clear-cut Kattar versus Chikadze breakdown, and it's an hour long as it is. So I think I have to stop here. But I will give it a shot. I will try and preview the event, or rather at least the main event, somewhere this week, hopefully not too late in the week, so as not to make the preview relevant. And I'm pretty sure Fenio and Dan Albert are in the process of recording a preview for the entirety of the pay-per-view, so certainly stay tuned for that. Beyond that, what else do I have in mind? Oh, yeah, the commentary in MMA, the discussion panel about commentary in MMA, and just commentary in combat sports in general, and what constitutes good commentary. We're going to record that, and it's going to come out before the end of next week, I think, hopefully. Maybe, basically later, somewhere later in the month. Or maybe like in the beginning of February, I don't know. Depending on scheduling issues, depending on scheduling and all that kind of stuff, scheduling is an issue. It's a bit of a problem because everyone lives in different time zones, obviously, and has day jobs. But we'll try and get it out. And I've recorded a boxing instructional, an instructional on how to utilize boxing basics in MMA. It's called Soviet Boxing for MMA. It's up on our Patreon for $3 per month. So if you wish to... I cover the first 3 parts cover just the bare bones, stuff like stunts and stuff like moving with punches, straight punches, like the very basicest of basic things. And I go over each detail and I explain why you should why I prefer to do things the way I do them. I give a reason for everything that I demonstrate in there. So if you have ever wondered why certain things are done the way they're done, check it out. As also, I've said this before, if you subscribe at $5 per month, you naturally get access to all of our content, and then you get access to our Discord server where you may hang out with like-minded fans and converse with staff members. Our Discord subscribers, guys like Raiden and Silas, who recently started putting out their own podcast, they host watch parties, fight watch parties in the voice chat. So if you ever wanted to hang out with some nice people and watch some nice fights, watch some cool fights, that's the place to go. This is, I would say, this is the first proper Tengridome episode of this year. Last episode was kind of like me still trying to shake myself awake. But I've been feeling kind of under the weather lately, but I've managed to get my shit together for this one, so I hope you enjoyed it. There's a huge backlog of topics that I would like to cover this year, and here's hoping I would manage to get them all. As otherwise, here's to a new year of combat sports, and hopefully a new year of excellent performances and excellent fights. Anyway, glad to be back. Hope this episode made for an interesting listen, and I'm off. I think we can all agree that elbows are fucking sick.